healthy. And yet the foods were, far from that, but people just kind of have that perception. So do keep that in mind when you're looking at your diets. Now, I'm going to talk about the zone diet, because this one is an awesome diet if you're comp prepping. It's also one of the few diets where they actually talk about like mental performance as well as physical performance. So we've talked about with low carb how, that has a specific purpose because you're trying to acutely get your weight down and get that under control. We are assuming that you are not necessarily super physically active, but you will want to move to that. And it also has some negative, drawbacks to it in terms of, potentially making you feel a bit nauseous, lacking of energy, lacking of mental energy. Now, when someone's comp prepping, obviously they're normally doing a heavy weight training session and 1 or 2 cardio sessions. So there's a lot of aerobic activity, a lot of anaerobic activity. And as I said, that changes the whole ball game. Like, you're already, from doing those things, are improving your health markers. So that's not necessarily the aim of that particular diet. The aim of that diet is to, preserve as much muscle as possible whilst getting your fat down, whilst still being able to train very, very heavily, train very hard. And then, because obviously the harder you train, the more you burn. And if you don't have the energy to train hard, push hard, contract hard, you don't burn as many calories, because a lot of your diet is structured around the fact that you are burning more calories. Now, and again, I will say that right now, that any weight loss diet, you do still need to burn more calories than what you consume. But what we've talked about is that some of those diets make that easier just by the natural way that you don't want to eat more necessarily, or the way that your hunger is dealt with. So coming back to the zone diet, for anyone who didn't like maths, you're probably going to hate this diet, but they did make it very, very simple. So essentially the zone diet, as I said, they talk about mental performance, they talk about physical performance, they also talk about health, because it was originally designed to bring down, diet-related inflammation, which, is obviously things which cause different types of health issues through the foods that we eat. So they wanted to try to correct that. And at the same time, obviously, bring down, your blood pressure, improve your blood lipids and that type of thing. So it's actually quite a low calorie diet in terms of how it's structured. So what they basically do is look at your lean body weight. Essentially, you might weigh 200 kilos, but 150 kilos of that might actually be lean muscle, or, you might weigh 80 kilos and 60 or 50 kilos of that is actual, lean body weight. So they count the lean body weight and they say, okay, for every pound of lean body weight, you will have 1 gram of protein if you are highly active. So they recognize the activity factor in there. So a lot of diets, they don't take that into account, or they're very, very kind of skewed one way or another. But the zone diet takes into account if you're totally sedentary or if you're heavily active. And obviously they recognize that the more active you are, the more protein that you need to eat. And then from that point there, it basically dictates how much carbohydrate and how much fat that you need to have. So that's without following zone, and I did for one particular prep, but without following zone, that was kind of my theory as well. Take care of the protein, and then the rest will look after itself, essentially by the foods that you choose to eat. So once you work out what you need to eat in terms of your protein, that pretty much he breaks it up into like what he calls a block. So if you're eating, for example, you need 120 grams of protein, he'll divide that by 7, because he has like each block of protein food is 7 grams of protein, and that's what he links back to, like a serving or a portion of that particular food. So as I said, it's very mathematical, very complicated, but if you actually have a look at it and break it down, it actually lists out, okay, this is what one block of food looks like, and this is a good choice, this is a bad choice, and this is an average choice. So a lot of the work is done for you, but it is, as I said, quite complex to combine. But if you are looking at doing competitions, comp prep, you absolutely need to get your head around this kind of thing, because you can't just leave it to chance, because that's why the person, standing next to you who got more ripped than you or retained more muscle mass than you, that's why they are doing better, is because they're following some kind of a process where they're actually looking at what they're eating, measuring and weighing what they're eating. So, as I said, the maths behind it is essentially might tell you that you need to eat 15 blocks of food per day, and then you will break that up into your different meals. So you might have 5 meals of 3 blocks, but that each block of protein of 7 grams means you get to have 9 grams of carbohydrate and 3 grams of fat. If you're eating lean protein sources, or if you're eating, higher fat meats and fish and stuff like that, you only need to have 1.5 grams of fat per block. So it essentially is very, very prescriptive. And the other thing about it is it's at every single meal you have to follow that. So whilst a lot of the other diets almost by default follow that, because, for example, if you're following a diet where you have to eat meat and low-carb vegetables, you're essentially going to be following that same kind of pattern simply by the fact that you don't have much other choice. Like, it has to be, a meat with some salad. So it essentially makes every single meal the same. It's only the lifestyle diets where you might have more carbohydrate at one meal and then more protein at another, because the meat isn't necessarily eaten at every single meal, or some of the protein is coming from grains and pulses and beans rather than all coming from lean meat. So so that's where that type of difference comes in. But most diets, just by default, you end up kind of eating the same thing at every single meal. So that diet in itself, what it does is obviously, you go away, you look at your little choices, and you look and you say things like lean egg whites, lean protein, all the things that you normally eat on a bodybuilding diet are the types of protein that you go for. If you're following a vegan or vegetarian, then obviously, lean protein sources, whether that be like a plant-based protein powder. And then your carbohydrates, you're looking at things like your oatmeal, you're staying away from refined grains. It's that same theme that keeps coming through, staying away from high glycemic carbohydrates, staying away from highly processed foods, staying away from, high sugar foods, and really kind of sticking with those carbohydrates, which are much more slowly released. So, hey, Carla, super excited to try the Gourmet WPI. I hope you like it. It is, it's been going really, really well. So that is essentially the zone diet. And I found for me, in terms of prepping, it actually worked really, really well, because it wasn't too far away from what I was already doing, but as I said, it's a very it's very healthy, and I think that's the main key of it, is that it's every diet that you're approaching needs to be very, very healthy. So that is essentially like the main type of diets. I followed that one time, but I do tend to work more on what we call a high protein, which is around that 35% of your diet coming from protein, up to 40, maybe as low as 30, but that kind of area. And then I would stick to under 20% fat, which is considered a very low fat diet, and then the balance of that being carbohydrate. So by that comparison to the normal high carbohydrate, 60% carbohydrate, that is actually, like I said, it's moderate. And if you look at how much is burnt through the actual exercise part of it, it actually then becomes quite a low carbohydrate diet. So just in thinking about that, it forces your body to be in that fat burning state, and obviously because you are cutting up and you are losing body fat, you are pushing your body into that type of state. But I will stress that when you're trying to prep for a competition, you do have to be more controlled, and you do need to be more strict than what you would if you're just overall trying to improve your body composition. And it's also a finer line because you don't have as much excess, and you're basically stripping your body down to a level which is beyond what it naturally wants to go to. So it does have a tendency to then want to use more protein to create the energy and not just the fat. So you have to, run on that higher side of protein. So, as we know, protein helps to preserve your muscle mass, helps to make you feel fuller for longer. It does actually increase energy expenditure, both when you're eating the protein and longer term. So that was something interesting that I guess we all kind of knew, but there's definitely research out there